Welcome. Okay. All right. So I think we're gonna get started here. Hello and welcome. My name is Rachel Fowley-Neufeld. I coordinate events for McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. I'm so pleased that you're joining us tonight. Thank you for being here. From this end, we're streaming from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Plains Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota peoples. This is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'd like to thank Suzanne Keeptwo for joining us tonight to talk about her book, We All Go Back to the Land, the who, why, and how of land acknowledgements. Really looking forward to hearing from you and just want to thank you for being here tonight. We also have a really special guest host, Curtis Peeteetuce. He's going to be chatting with Suzanne about the event. I'd also like to thank Tom Lohr at Brush Education for working with us to organize the evening. So I think we'll pass things over to Curtis pretty quick here. I just have to figure out how to unspotlight myself. How did I do that? Let's go back to gallery. There we go. Okay, so like I said, we have a really special guest host here with us tonight. Curtis Peeteetuce is an award-winning theater artist from Beardy's and Okemasis Cree Nation. Since 2001, he's had the honor of working with many talented people in theater, radio drama, music, and film. He's a storyteller, actor, writer, director, dancer, and musician, and the playwright for the popular Res Christmas Story series. And he's also published many recent plays, including Popcorn Elder, which was nominated for 2 Saskatchewan Arts Awards. He's also served as an MC, cultural arts consultant, and advocates for mental health and suicide awareness. And he also said just before the event started, he wanted to get into radio. So I think with that, we'll transfer it over to Curtis. So welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much, Rachel. And Danse Kakiao. Hello, everybody. Curtis Peeteetuce and Siagasan. My name is Curtis Peeteetuce. Niach o GCC Sagaiganik. I am from the Duck Lake area here in Saskatchewan. And Kamskawesit Egwa Ogemasis Askiganak. Beardy's and Okemasis is my home community. And tonight we are here for a brand new book, which is on the horizon, called We All Go Back to the Land. And tonight we have a very special guest who is the author of this book. So I'd like to allow a short time and space with our special guest, Suzanne. Please take this time to introduce yourself to us. Thank you.
Kwe. Suzanne Keeptwo de Dishtakas, Wimitagotas, Shaganash Kitchisiparini Kwe. Bonsoir, je m'appelle Suzanne Keeptwo, je suis Métis du Québec, and good evening. My name is Suzanne Keeptwo. I'm a descendant of the Kitchisiparinniweg, otherwise known as the people of the Great River, an Algonquin people within the Algonquin Nation, and Les Canadiens on my mother's side. And my father is Irish Canadian, and I therefore self-identify as Métis of Quebec out of the historic community of Fort-Coulange in Western Quebec. And miigwech, thank you, merci to all of you for tuning in tonight to learn more about this book, and miigwech to Curtis for agreeing to enter into conversation with me for a little while. Miigwech.
Mi wasin, nanaskabun isquel. Thank you very much. So a lovely friend, a lovely spirit, and a very, very, very prolific and passionate Isquel. Suzanne, you and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and I've had the pleasure of working with you in the realm of storytelling, and that was such a treat. So I want to thank you very much. I'd like to start by just sharing a little bit of a story, if I may, Suzanne. And the story is that in the past year, I was approached by a leader of an arts organization here in Saskatoon, Settler Man. And he had said, Curtis, I would like to do a Zoom with you and record you and us having a conversation about life in Treaty 6. And so my response was, what do you mean, life in Treaty 6? And he said, we're going to talk about anything that you want to talk about. And I went, oh, life in Treaty 6, where do I begin? The experience of that was very triggering for me. In the end, I did not end up doing that interview because it was very hard for me to do that. There was just so much to talk about. Now, I want to put that off to the side because it segues me into conversation with you, because we're talking about, we all go back to the land, but in one sense, we're talking about land acknowledgement. And when we talk about land acknowledgement, that in itself can also be the opening of, wow, there's so much to talk about. Where do we begin? So we all go back to the land. There is so much in this book. And what I mean by that is we can't talk about life in Treaty 6 without talking about this. We can't talk about land acknowledgements without talking about certain other topics. So this is the first impression I have, and that's the story I wanted to share with you. Because with this particular book, you and I, as you know, we can go anywhere with this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Where do you want me to go?
Good. Well, we're not going to talk per se about the book, because it would be like talking about a movie to a bunch of people who have not yet seen it. And we're not going to do that to a bunch of our guests here today. And by the way, welcome everybody to the Zoom session. So we want to talk about things that you want to talk about, and things that are important to talk about with regards to this book, and also everything else indirectly related. So let's begin with, everything starts with a story for me. Story is very important about who I am. Maybe if we could start with, could you share a little bit about the story behind this book?
The story behind the book. Well, there is quite a story behind the book, but as far as either the writing process or what propelled me to write the book, there are two different answers. So how about I talk about the writing process? Is that something that you'd like to learn about?
Oh, please and thank you.
Or both. We can just see where it goes. You can ask me anything you want. The writing process for me was very intense. And because it was born out of anger and disappointment and sadness, but it was also emotionally intense because of the framework within which I wrote the book. It was a very brief amount of time. It took me 4.5 months to research and write this book. Most people are surprised by that. But even though that sounds like a very brief amount of time for such a dense book with so much information held within, it was very intense as far as every day that I put into it, those 4.5 months. So I spent an average of 12 hours a day, 7 days a week researching and writing this book. So it was a very intense process. So that was, but I have to say, and I did preface this in the book, that so much of the knowledge that I carry, I've been carrying for many decades. And, it's taken a lifetime of me thinking and contemplating and listening and learning and participating in conversations and sitting with elders and really paddling a lot alone in my canoe on the Peeteetuce, or hiking over mountain trails and forests to deeply think about my relationship with the land, my own ancestries and my ancestors' relationship to the land, and what it means to me today, what it means to us as Indigenous peoples today. And so the book, it came out of a very natural, organic place, except for the section that I wrote on the problematic land acknowledgements. That was the most intense writing that I did, most intense research and writing that I did. And I had no idea what was going to happen in that section, because I literally chose 7 random land acknowledgements. Just randomly, I went, okay, what land acknowledgement? Oh, here's one. What does this one mean? And I approached it from a very innocent perspective, saying, oh, okay, if I were to hear that or read that, what questions would my inquiring mind want to know more about? So then I just did the research and I summarized. And the most interesting and most intense rabbit hole that I went into was the prairie provinces. And it started with the Grand Prairie, Alberta Land Acknowledgement, but then that just brought me into Saskatoon and Winnipeg and BC and all over the place. So that rabbit hole took 2 weeks out of 4.5 months to just write that one section on the Grand Prairie Land Acknowledgement.
Wow. Question. You know, this book is mainly written in the English language, but there are other excerpts or samples of language that we get. What was that like for you, making sure that you can honor some of that language, but as well share what you wanted to share, and of course, the English language?
That was, it was a challenge when it came to honoring the elders that I spoke with, knowledge keepers that I spoke with, the cultural carriers, because I really wanted to honor the culture above the imposition of Canadian culture. So, for example, I wanted to, if I asked them, do you have a traditional name? I would like to put it, to identify you first by your traditional name. And so then I had to use the parenthesis for the English given name. And then I had to, I wanted to always prioritize their traditional territory and then put in parenthesis, you know, the Canadian province within that territory. So a lot of that was stylistically very, not necessarily difficult, but it had to be consistent throughout the book. The formula of that had to be consistent throughout the book. So the language itself, the various Indigenous languages, well, I had those cultural carriers to confirm the spelling and the words that I wanted to use. But the most interesting thing for me was when I delved into the origins of the definition of leaders or leadership in from different cultural concepts. And that was so fascinating to me. And, you know, for example, an Inuit knowledge keeper who was so such a wonderful resource for me, and I sat with him. And most cultural carriers, when I say, how do you say this word in your language? So I'd say, how do you say leader in your language? They'd say, well, it's this. I go, well, what does it mean? Oh, well, it means chief or it means boss. And I'd say, no, what does it really mean? And then they would open up. And that's when the cultural context would be born. And I'd say, that's the information that I want to share. And so, for example, Peeteetuce said in two different dialects from out of Nunavut, he said, well, there were many different ways to define the different ways of saying leader or leadership in Inuktitut. And one of them I remember, and it's in the book, of course, he says, leading the people to safety. And I thought, what a beautiful definition of a leader, to bring one's people to safety. So that's, you know, that's how I use the language in different languages. But for my own self, I also embedded the French language because of my Quebec heritage and identity. And so I embedded many of those words throughout. And there were a couple of citations that I used where I didn't offer a direct translation. I just summarized the essence of it. And I figured people should know enough French in this country or be able to, you know, Google Translate or whatever if they really want a literal translation. But I just provided a summary of what that was. So that's how I used different languages in the book.
You talk about it so humbly, but I mean, that journey in itself is remarkable. As an actor who knows and is familiar with the Cree language, having to work in Elizabethan language with Shakespeare, it's a world of knowing. It's a world of knowledge. It is such an incredible journey. I commend you on that journey. You talked earlier about different land acknowledgements that you were speaking about and addressing in the book. Can we take a look at one particular land acknowledgement and then perhaps have you share a little bit of reading based around that?
Well, I guess, but that is the most intense and lengthy chapter of the book.
Okay.
And and the reason why it's so dense with information, it's not that anyone would possibly, grab her book and just read that section if you happen to be living in the territory of one of those land acknowledgements that I explore in the book. And that's something I wanted to say too, that even though if you looked at the index, you'd say, oh, okay, she's got 8 different land acknowledgements. I did Whitehorse in the Yukon, Grand Prairie, Alberta. I did Toronto. I did Northern or Southern Ontario. I did Ottawa. I did New Brunswick. So specific areas and based on the treaties and the history. And as I said, I just grabbed them to be sort of cross-sectional. And so, but the way my writing style really is non-linear, of course, and there's so much information. So if someone is residing in the province of BC, for example, there's a lot of BC specific information in here, although by looking at the index, they won't find, oh, there's a land acknowledgement for BC. So it's not a guide in that way. It's really meant to be read cover to cover and hopefully all Canadians would read it, and all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit would read it to garner something from it. So getting to your question, well, this one's a bit controversial. I could share with you if you want that. Not that I'm ever controversial, Curtis, you know that. But I have to find it because I look at my copy is so full of I've got to look at the index. I only wrote the book. I didn't memorize the book. Okay.
That is fine. That is fine. While you're looking for that, can we look at the video sample?
Sure, that would be a great idea.
Right on. Let's take a look here. You can find on YouTube, Land Acknowledgement, Varenus Von Sketch Show. Let's take a look.
Hello. Oh. Hello. First, I'd like to remind everyone here to turn off your cell phones. Before we begin this evening's performance, we would like to acknowledge that this theater stands on territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Petun First Nations. We are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to make right with all our relations. And now, please enjoy the show.
Oh, sorry, hello? Sorry, excuse me, should we go?
Excuse me?
Oh, no, I just mean if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we leave?
Oh, no. The theater is here now. We'd just like to acknowledge whose land it is.
I'm sorry, I'm so confused. So if we're on someone else's land, shouldn't we do something about that, or?
Hopefully we'll enjoy the performance.
Oh, okay, so some of the money from the ticket sales of the show are going to the Indigenous communities?
Well, no.
Oh, a portion of them?
No, the ticket sales go to the theater.
So is the money from the bottled water sold here going to the First Nations for clean drinking water, or?
Oh, no, that money goes to Nestle.
Nestle.
They're a sponsor.
I'm so sorry, I'm so confused. So whose land are we on? What are we doing?
It's a dialogue.
How are we making right?
Well, there's a plaque you can read in the lobby.
I don't understand.
I'm getting a message from the stage manager that we need to begin the show, so please take your seats.
But,
Have a good time.
Good
night.
So sit down. Enjoy the show. Just enjoy the show.
I love that.
All right.
I love that. Somebody sent that clip to me while I was writing, and I went, oh, I have to put that in the book. So I do summarize that clip in the book, and it's just so forthright. It's clever, it's honest, and it's satirical, and so it's entertaining. But maybe I'll read a little bit from the book that around that particular clip, because in the clip, of course, they end by referencing Nestle. And so when I listened to that clip, I thought, oh, there's got to be something, because I know too, because I have a theater background, and I know that any script is well crafted and nothing is in there for no reason. So I thought, okay, let me do a little research on Nestle. What was that about?
Mm.
And so it took up some space here, and I'll just read what I wrote in that section.
Okay.
Water is a human right. So Nestle assumes a legal right to deplete natural sources for commercial gain, claiming it belongs to no one. They have been sued and challenged over a range of unethical practices, such as pumping natural water sources without a permit, selling tap water as their bottled product, illegally extracting water from Brazil for their Perrier brand, selling melamine contaminated products, discouraging breastfeeding in third world countries to promote baby formula as supreme to mother's milk, illegally bringing expired powdered milk from one country to another and labeling it as local and new, and child labor, child slavery, and child abuse. For multi-billion-dollar corporations like Nestle, scandals and guilty verdicts result in having to pay million-dollar donations to charitable organizations. And during their prosecution, they are permitted by the system in place to do whatever they are doing wrong until the courts resolve the matter. Who knows? Maybe the theater where the Baroness von Sketch troupe filmed their satire received a donation because of a guilty verdict for Nestle. The moral of the story, a donor is not always a good guy, but performing arts companies controlled by public money must secure donations to supplement their finances. It's all part of how the new economy functions. So this is my story about land, and really the book is, it's not just how to do a great 30-second land acknowledgement or who were the original inhabitants of that particular treaty territory or unceded traditional territory and who owns it now. It's really about one's relationship with the land, and that historic relationship with the land is a relationship between the Indigenous peoples of what is now within the nation state called Canada, and the fact that the original peoples of these lands that we now call home were kept in pristine condition because of honoring that relationship. So my book is really about acknowledging the original inhabitants, of course, because of that relationship we've had for thousands of years, and but then to talk about what's going on in the land or what's going on with the waters now, because now we're at a point where after 200 years of the nation state of Canada controlling the land and resources, and the people who once honored the land and the resources in a good way for the benefit of all, they've destroyed our air, soil, and waters after our Indigenous ancestors had kept this land, air, water, and soil in healthy condition, in well-balanced condition for centuries. So that's sort of, my point about land acknowledgements. It's not just about the original inhabitants. It's about what's going on to the land and water now. So that's why I wrote about Nestle, and I took that point from that sketch to talk about corporate citizens. And so that's part of, how does the non-Indigenous event host organizer do an effective land acknowledgement? And I write about that in the book, versus how do Indigenous people, because I really push and put the onus back on Indigenous people to assume, to claim, to reclaim this protocol of acknowledging our lands and what's going on right now with our relationship to our lands, condition of the land. So I really talk about those different responsibilities. So one of the responsibilities of the non-Indigenous Canadian who wants to do an effective or organize an effective land acknowledgement is to take a look at perhaps those corporate donors and do a little bit of homework. And what is that corporate donor all about? And are they raping and pillaging the land and the water or other living entities? And why would you want to contradict a land acknowledgement by saying we honor the land upon which we are all situated, and then take the blood money, more or less, from the very corporation that is stealing and bottling billions of liters of natural gifted water and putting them in plastic bottles to then contaminate the land. So
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, because what that brings me back to is the story I shared earlier when I said life in Treaty 6, I can't talk about that without talking about, and in this book, you talk about certain uncomfortable truths. And that's very important for all of us to know, those uncomfortable truths when it comes to anything directly related to land acknowledgements. And I mean things like, there are our identity politics, there are the ways we acknowledge each other, what we do to each other in the community. These are not the things we're going to talk about tonight, because as you know, Suzanne, these are very exhausting and long conversations to be had. Instead, what we want to talk about is how, as we segue, we can pave the road forward. And I want to kind of segue into another section here, but I want to remind the Zoom room too that we do have a Q&A section. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to hit that Q&A button and we'll get to you towards the end of the section. But what I wanted to get to was this whole idea of, I guess, when we talk about land acknowledgements, the importance of moving forward, the original agreements. I would like to, please and thank you, share a little link that is not even 1 minute long. And I'd like to hear from somebody from 1972, okay? So I'm gonna share screen. And this is families were followed by a film crew in 1972 as they took tools, nothing but tools, and they went to live on the land in winter for 6 months. So this is a small section of that, and we get to hear the perspective of a hunter and his thoughts about the land. Here we go, Here we go.
Кибачимехтум чаганян чикнайтам энто кекишатстарым скакапшистега ягманга сатстадын тси атаим хикутан девитсе да ябцкутстадисе ягманга сатстадын тси Тиги бат биоши и дагнуэн уит биоши нутси мы маг маскут биоши Hadden de biosine Da var en sjøt de biosine at næste de de bet så jeg vet på mat sjø når han skal være muy venlig som den de spiller den
Okay, just really quick. There's an excerpt from Cree Hunters of Mistassini. So what we're getting onto next is a little bit about the idea of spiritual law, or sometimes we know it as natural law, or even the original agreements. Over to you, Suzanne.
Okay, Miigwech. That is such a beautiful documentary. I highly recommend everybody to check that out. And what struck me about that documentary when I watched it was that in spite of being so isolated and remote, you know, the Hudson's Bay Company fur trader was able to fly in to collect those furs, and along with that HBC representative, they brought the priest, the Catholic priest, and that really hit me hard. Even though that film was close to 50 years ago, it you know, I was a kid, I was a kid while they were doing that, and I know that like my grandmother's father and her uncles, her brothers and her sons built her a cabin along the river in the same way, with the moss between the logs of the trees that they just cut from the land. Anyway, all that to say, it was such a rich depiction of traditional ways of knowing and being and practices. And it was sad for me to realize that the flooding due to the James Bay hydro project that took place soon after that documentary film has dispersed Inuit and Cree of the area. It decimated the caribou, and it also it changed the life forever. And I often wonder about the young children depicted in that documentary who would be in their early 50s now, and I really thought long and hard about them and wondered if they've been confronted with depths of despair because of that lost lifestyle that they were preciously taught in that context. So yeah, regarding my book, that segment that you chose really reflects deeply on what I wrote in the book as the premise, and I explain about the original agreement. So I'll read that part from the book if you don't mind.
Thank you. Please.
Okay. The impact and influence of the foreigner's wares and ways of being highlight the vast differences between Western and Indigenous norms across what is now the Canadian landscape. From an Indigenous perspective, the purpose of the newcomer's encounter was to offer a gift in friendship or make a trade. But the intention of their visit was not always honest and transparent. For all the Christian biblical tenets that preach against passing judgment on others, the missionaries, trappers, and governors misjudged the Indigenous peoples of this land as primitive and simple, who knew not what to do with the riches of the land, the Earth Mother, and her natural resources. In fact, the original peoples across the Earth Mother were and are so much more inherently advanced because of a deep understanding of humankind's well-being as dependent upon the relationship with the land and water, flora and fauna. Our ancestors kept all living entities in pristine condition for the benefit of all, including future generations. There is no greater wisdom than that. In fact, it is not simply an understanding or worldview. It is traditionally referred to as an original agreement of sacred proportion, to not only honor and respect the land and all living entities, but to revere the Earth Mother. Because we adhered to the laws of nature, we were in fact highly advanced peoples, not the primitives our ancestors were accused of being. Advanced because we knew and respected our original agreement to live as one, to live in health and harmony, to live in balance and beauty. In this way of life, we celebrated Mino Bima Nidzuin, the good life, due to our Mino Mashkiki, good medicine, clean air, pure waters, rich soil, and abundant plants and animals to sustain us all and our future generations. Indigenous peoples of the world are connected by the common ideology of living by the natural law. Distinct arts and cultures of Indigenous peoples arose from the very landscape inhabited, from seafaring peoples to snow trekking, river traveling, prairie pounding, mountain dwelling, seed planting, forest hunting peoples. Indigenous cultures were born of the territory their peoples knew and loved like their mother. Our values held us in place until circumstance shook our place loose from beneath us. Miigwech for that.
Hi, Nanaskamun for that read. Beautiful. And I really think that natural, spiritual those laws speak so much more when they are also spoken in the language. And I heard you say in the language, what I would say in Cree, mio pamatsoin, the good life. It's such a common expression that I'm starting to hear in the language. And that in itself, mio pamatsoin, also encompasses a holistic view of how we move forward together in good ways.
Mhm. Mhm.
We're going to get to some questions in just a little while here. We already have a couple that are starting to come in, and so that is beautiful and wonderful. So one of the things about writing a book, again, going back to my analogy of we can't talk about life in Treaty 6 without talking about some of the hardships and the struggles that we go through as Indigenous peoples. One of the things that is important, though, in all the work that I've been doing is this idea of self-acknowledgement. And you and I touched a little bit about that on that. And we actually started our session by acknowledging ourselves. Curtis Peeteetuce and Siyagasud, Nia Ochi Sisip Sagaiganik. You know, it's taken me a long time to learn these words, the power of these words and self-acknowledgement. But you talk a little bit about self-acknowledgement and how we can move forward in that way.
Yes, because this takes place within the chapter I wrote on identity politics, and you know that it's a really current and controversial topic that has exploded in the last few months. But I wrote about it a year ago, and I really spoke about this phenomenon of people who are accused of falsifying their identification or taking space from real Indigenous people, and so on and so forth. And it is a problem, and there are many different angles to consider, and there are different players in part of that, in that conversation. And one of the things that I state in the book is, you know, these differing worldviews, and our colonial institutions have policies of confidentiality. So when someone, you know, can check a box to say that they're First Nation, Métis, or Inuit, that's good enough for those colonial institutions who are looking to hire a person for a designated position. But if someone is exaggerating their identity, or perhaps has just discovered who they are for whatever reasons, and they haven't lived the life of an Indigenous person with a full awareness of their family history or political or cultural identity, then it could be misconstrued as someone not being right for that type of job. So from a differing worldview, if an Indigenous community questions the hiring of someone that they don't recognize, or someone who has not been known in our various Indigenous communities as an Indigenous person, well, the colonial institution, it can protect that person because of those policies of identification. So that's just an example of a differing worldview where we self-identify based on the land that we have historically inhabited. And even the very names, talking about the language that we talked about and what I used in the book, you know, the Kitchissippi-Riniweg, for example, my maternal ancestors, the people of the Great River. So we were defined by the landscape that we inhabited and we took care of. So it's an interesting protocol, although now, you know, so what I suggest in the book is if we adhere to these protocols of self-introduction, and really revitalize that practice, then I don't think that anybody could get away with not fully understanding who they are or where they come from, you know, but then taking space in an Indigenous context or circle, because they would have to be able to stand up and proudly state who they are, where they come from, and what their purpose is. So I suggest in the book it would be very easily eradicated if we just adhered to those protocols of self-introduction.
Beautiful, beautiful. Wonderful, wonderful. And so just before we conclude, we do have a couple minutes left. I was wondering if you wanted to speak a little bit about some of the people who have shared with you. So one person from our territory here that you may have crossed paths with is a beautiful man named Joseph Keeptwo. Can you please share a little bit about your experiences there?
Oh, miigwech for asking me. And I really did think about Joseph because I know that, we're zooming out of Saskatoon. And I've known Joseph for a number of years, and I've always admired him. And he's a cultural carrier, and a knowledge keeper, and a language holder. And I knew that I could count on him to inform me about, for example, the way that the Plains Cree say leader and what that meant. So I could actually read a little bit about that. It's very brief, I think, about Joseph's contribution. He contributed a few things in here, and I found it was really interesting what he shared, and I hope he doesn't mind. He might be in the audience, and if you are, Joseph, miigwech for contributing to my work. So I say knowledge keeper, and I won't even try to butcher his name, but it is written in here as his dominant namesake in the language. It's a beautiful name. And anyway, Joseph told me there are many ways to define leader in the Plains Cree language. And excuse my pronunciation, Onikenu literally means the one ahead, and is recognized as one who works on behalf of the people. Okima is typically translated as chief, but it really means one the people confide in and have chosen to trust to lead. The title of Okimakan, although similar to Okima, more precisely defines one who is under the governance of Canada and a representative of Indigenous and Northern affairs. Joseph informed me it literally means, and I quote him, a fake representative elected through the Elections Act determined by Canadian law. These are interpretations of the words he has heard within a cultural context. And as he said, dictionaries don't usually have room for such long definitions. So I thought that was really telling, as I mentioned earlier, language is the key to the culture and the worldview. And that's why it's so important for all of us, or any of us, to really embrace what we have and celebrate it and seek more and learn it if we can. Unfortunately, many of the original languages have gone are sleeping, as many elders say. They won't dare say they are extinct. And there's an interesting story about the Wendat language that came back after a few hundred years of being asleep. But I won't get into that because I know we're running out of time.
Wow. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to give some space and time and place to our guests in the Zoom room today. And we have one question here I want to share with you, Suzanne, from the Zoom room. And this question came in. How do I, as a settler, honor this relationship to the land?
How do you honor it? Well, first, you need to know the history. And I know that with the current trend of land acknowledgement, it was often suggested that Indigenous people don't need to do land acknowledgements because we know what land we're inhabiting and what land we're affiliated with and connected to. So it's really up to settler Canadians to do the homework. But to me, that threw me off because of those traditional ways of knowing and being, and those self-identification protocols that I just referred to. So for the settler Canadian, I think the homework that you need to do is really, first of all, do a little bit of the historical research, and perhaps, and then to bring it into a contemporary context to understand what's going on in your community. What's the quality of the air, the water, and the land? Are there any atrocities going on? Are there any violations going on? Or is there any toxic waste that's destroying the area that you call home? So that's how we develop a relationship with the land. In the book, I also even say, if you start to think more holistically and universally or existentially, the Earth Mother belongs to us all and we belong to her. You know, so when we're walking, how often do we walk down the city street or go through a municipal park and go, oh, look at the garbage, especially at this time of year when the spring and the snow is all melted and all that garbage reveals itself. And how many times, oh, that's disgusting, that's awful, isn't it terrible? Well, I bring plastic gloves and I bring plastic bags and I start to just take care of the Earth Mother. I don't say, well, that's on his property or that's municipal property or that's the National Capital Commission's property and someone's going to get paid to clean this up. I just do it. And that creates relationship, a caring relationship with that land, and to really think about how we're using our water that runs down the taps, you know, and how are we, you know, recycling is not going to save the planet. So we have to become well informed about the climate crisis. And I just learned the other day that, you know, green energy, which is something that I, you know, suggest in the book, that we have the intelligence as a human species to do things differently. But do we have the moral integrity to do things differently? That's the real conundrum. And so I think if we start to really think about how we are capable of doing things differently and even doing without, you know, we are so spoiled. So I don't want the green energy movement to simply create another way of sustaining our very spoiled lifestyle as North Americans. You know, we've got so much packaged garbage. We've got so much choice. We've got too many cars on the road. We are so spoiled. Can we sacrifice some of these things in order to help save the planet, help save our Earth Mother and her blood waters? Because we're all impacted by it now, just not Indigenous peoples. We are all impacted. And that's why at the end of the book, I invite everybody into accepting the original agreement to respect and protect the Earth Mother. She's the ultimate gift giver. You know, water used to be free. I remember, I told my gas station attendant today, I remember when I saw the first bottle of plastic, the plastic bottle of water for sale. And I was shocked. I remember exactly the moment who I was with when I saw that. I said, you're buying water? We would drink it at my grandmother's out of the lakes and out of the pump that pumped right from the river.
I talked to my own grandmother, Nookum, we say in Cree, my grandmother, and I had asked her what life was like when she was a little girl, and she said that we used to just grab a cup, go to the lake, and, you know, dip it in the lake, and there's our water. Or we put a big pail out when it rained, or when the snow melted, we would have water. It was no problem. And then I asked her about some of the things about how the people were, and she said everybody had something. Nobody went without.
Exactly. And that is about those age-old value systems that we had, and what the Cree of Mistassini were talking about, those Cree hunters. We always had those guiding principles, those codes of ethics, those principles of sharing and really taking care of one another. And that was the gift exchange economy that we engaged in. And it's such a beautiful way of life. And, you know, I don't think we'll ever get back to that. We can't revert. We have to move ahead in a good way. And, you know, this is another thing that I was thinking about, Curtis. Nobody's defining what reconciliation is. You know, it's tossed around. I know what truth is. And there are a lot of harsh truths in this book. You know it. And, but recently in traditional Algonquin territory, there was a real controversy over a real estate deal with non-status First Nation, Algonquin First Nation. And the status Algonquin, for one of the status Algonquin First Nation, was really upset. One of the people from that reserve was really upset, saying, that's not reconciliation. How dare the real estate deal goes through with non-status Algonquin. This isn't reconciliation, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, when was it ever defined as economic opportunity? you know, or financial gain or commercial gain. And it made me think nobody's defining what reconciliation, but in the book I say, why don't we enter into a treaty of reconciliation, and let's make this saving the Earth Mother from further destruction our one point of reconciliation. The ultimate moment of reconciliation is just, let's reconcile with the earth. Everybody.
I love that. That is a beautiful message too. And it gets me to we have another query from the Zoom room. And this is from Katie, who says, I'd love to hear about what motivated Suzanne to write this book. So I'm wondering if that's part of the motivation too, is some of those original agreements, some of those laws and the ways of being that were before.
Yes, well, that is definitely, I wanted to remind Indigenous people of our original agreement, and I wanted to introduce non-Indigenous Canadians to our original agreement to hopefully unite in the spirit of reconciliation and make that our treaty of reconciliation. You know, so that definitely was the passion that I held within, that I felt I needed to get this message out. But the other reason was, you know, I was once gainfully employed. I worked hard to be able to buy back some traditional Algonquin territory, and but at the workplace, I was the only person of Algonquin heritage. And it came a point where the organization was talking about developing an Algonquin land acknowledgement, and I had been previously very valued for the knowledge that I carry and the opinions that I have and the context that I have for all kinds of reasons to create bridges of understanding. And yet when they started to develop their Algonquin land acknowledgement, I was excluded from the conversation, and it was being led and developed and supervised by predominantly non-Indigenous people. And I just felt really hurt by that. And I thought, darn it, you know, they don't want to hear what I have to say, maybe because I'm too controversial or I speak too many truths, and I try to speak them in a very respectful way. I don't blame people. I just say these are the hard truths, and this is what's really going on in Algonquin territory. So it's contradictory to hear, for me to hear an Algonquin land acknowledgement saying they are acknowledging and honoring the Algonquin people as stewards of the land, past, present, and future. Meanwhile, I know for a fact that there are violations going on, and we're in court and we're trying to defend the Earth Mother, and we are being manipulated and excluded. So for me, it was very hypocritical. So I thought, well, darn it, if they don't want to hear what I have to say, I guess I better write a book about it. So that's what really propelled me to write the book.
And we are so glad that you have written this piece. It's very informative. It takes us to places that we need to go. And I know that this sprouts from an uncomfortable place, and the book can speak truths that put us in uncomfortable places. But it reminds me of Michelle Odette, who was the president of the Native Women's Association of Canada at the Missing Murdered Women's Indigenous Women's Inquiry. And her closing speech was, everybody in Canada who is watching this now, you have positions of power and influence. And this inquiry puts us all in a place of discomfort, but we can face it. Like, let's face it. We can stay in this place of discomfort, or we can work together to get past it. Now, this book here takes us to uncomfortable places. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be a treaty of reconciliation, as you say, and it's meant to take us to in good places moving forward. So can you share with us like a closing thought or statement related about this work and moving forward?
I think I can. I could go right to the back of the book, and it's not like a film. This is not, what do they call it in film terms, where they ruin the ending? What's that called? Anyhow,
spoiler.
spoiler alert. You know what? And I've had so many people say, you know what? I always go to the back of the book first. I don't know. That's kind of like sacred clown teaching, but I just go to the back of the book because I end with the invitation, and I'll read that. So after hearing and reading all about the truths about what's going on in the land we now call the nation state of Canada, or across the land, I end with the invitation. I invite all Canadians, new or well settled, all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples within this nation state of Canada to join the traditionally minded, the traditionally driven, the traditionally governed, alongside the water protectors and land protectors and environmentalists, advocates, allies, friends, and activists to enter into the original agreement. I invite all those who have children or who have any family member or friends with children to enter into understanding the teaching of walking with heart and mind in the spirit of the 7 generations. I invite all those who enjoy nature walks, fishing expeditions, swimming, hiking, cottage life, and the country, mountains, valleys, tundras, flatlands, and forests to join in the quest for preservation, conservation, and protection of our lands and waters. I invite all those who farm or garden to think widely about how organic practices are the way of the present and the future, to think about the vital importance and urgency of healing the very soil that grows our food. Farmers are the nurturers of society and must understand fully what it is to nurture not only the palate, but the entire health of the body and brain by what they offer humankind for consumption. I invite all those who love domestic animals and are fascinated by or in awe of wild animals to join in on the complete understanding of how these animals need our protection from wet markets and the farming industry. We are what we eat. I invite all hunters to join in on the ethical practice of the hunt, to take only what is needed to ensure the continuance of the species, to take only what is in abundance, to make use of the entire animal, to be thankful for its life, and to share the bounties of the hunt with others. I invite all Canadians, new or well settled, and all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples within this nation state of Canada to embrace the original agreement as the ultimate act of reconciliation. By doing so, other positives will naturally come into being. It may take time, it will take effort, it will be challenging, but change will come for the better. We can do this together. Shimikwe.
I want to thank Rachel from McNally, and I would love to thank Tom Lohr, but most importantly, I want to thank our guests here today in Zoom for Zooming with us and joining this session. And last but not least, the most beautiful, wonderful, very, very beautiful spirit of Suzanne Keeptwo for putting this book together and for joining us here today. That's it. We are out of time. I want to thank you again, Suzanne, for joining us, and everybody in the Zoom room. It has been a great, great session today.
Miigwech, Curtis, I really appreciate your time and your interest.
Wonderful. I'm going to hand it back to Rachel, and she's going to give us some information, I think, about getting the book.
Yeah, thank you so much to both of you for being here tonight, to Suzanne Keeptwo and to Curtis Peeteetuce. I'm still just processing everything that you guys were talking about, and I'm really looking forward to spending more time with your book, Suzanne. So thank you for being here tonight. And of course to Tom Lohr at Brush Education. Obviously, we want everyone in the Zoom to pick up a copy of the book as well, or tell a friend who you think would be interested or, could learn something from the book. So please make sure you do that. We do offer curbside pickup and shipping via Canada Post, and you can give us a call at the store or purchase a copy of We All Go Back to the Land online. So once again, I just wanted to thank you all, and especially to Suzanne. So have a wonderful evening, everybody, and take care.
Bye-bye. Take
Rachel.
care.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.